On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Work of an anthology Passover music?
I make hip-hop music.
That's
and I'm
okay.
doing a hip-hop Seder.
Where are you going to present it?
Nowhere. I'll release it.
Send it up to 135th Street in Harlem, see how well it goes.
Let my people go. Let my people go. Let my people go. Let my people go. Let my people.
This is Bonjour Chai, the 4th annual Great Canadian Seder edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we have our annual tradition of hearing from Canadians about their Seders and the insights they bring to the holiday of Passover. And stay tuned, because two of those Canadians are the new co-hosts of Not in Heaven, our new CJN podcast.
No, I will not let them go.
10. Pharaoh changed his mind.
Let my people go.
Let my people go to the front of the bus.
Let all who are hungry come and eat. That is the message that we hear at the Seder, and we have people that are knocking at our door. I would like to welcome them in, not just as guests, but as the future co-hosts of Not in Heaven, the podcast that will be taking over this feed very shortly, right after Pesach. Matthew Leibl is a rabbi living in Winnipeg. Yedida is an editor at the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization. Matthew Leibl and Yedida Eisenstat, welcome to the Great Canadian Seder.
Thank you. This is very exciting.
Great to be here, Avi.
Can you tell us a bit about your Seders? Like, what were they like? What are they like?
Well, I have small children, and I am in the practice of hiring babysitters so they can stay home and be asleep so we can go have adult quality Seders. But this year we're experimenting with doing something for our kids for the first time. Our Seders are medievalist nerdy. We pull out facsimile Haggadot of medieval Haggadot and compare the text to the one we're familiar with and look at the illuminations and think about how the Seder has changed and evolved over the last 2,000 years, because my people are nerdy historians. That's what our Seders are like. We're going to try to engage my 6-year-olds and 4-year-olds in that.
I'm still trying to figure out exactly what in a medievalist style Seder. I want to go and see it. We have different Haggadot as well, but only because I think we have ones that have been weathered slightly by food dropped on them and by the yellow turning. We have that classic one, that classic Goldberg one in different versions. Mm-hmm. Most of them, every year when my Zeta, when I was young, when he would write it, he would write in the people's names, but then he would forget which Haggadah he had. So there were about 8 different versions that were all used by the leader. So there's debate about who actually has this reading part in English. And this Haggadah has somebody who's been dead for 14 years reading a part. So that's a little bit confusing. And then, of course, we threw into the mix a few Haggadot that we bought the one year we celebrated in Palm Springs, California, when, of course, Pesach happened so early that my Zeta said, you guys are either coming to the desert or you're doing it without us. So we have ones that we bought at a grocery store called Ralph's. And it's always interesting to compare how the Palm Springs grocery store Haggadah stacks up against the classic. I always wanted a super musical. Like, I love to sing. I play the piano. I would love a family that would just sing and sing and sing into the night. And my family has me like on a song limit. Like after Halachma, they're like, how about 2 more of those, Matt? And then we're good to eat. And I'm like, I want to sing. What about those families that sing? And they're like, you're not in one of those families.
Matthew, you are welcome to our Seder anytime, because we are one of those people. We sing and sing and sing. We go late, and we did not have the kids when they were too young to pay attention. I distinctly remember the first couple of years that our kids were really, really young. You'd put them to sleep before the Seder. I would tell them a long time ago, we were in this bad place and Hashem took us out and saved us from this guy named Paro. That's all you need to know. Good night. And then we would go do our like full on like Seder with them, like asleep. But as soon as they could, then they really they would get into it and get involved and do all the stuff. Every year I try to get 2 or 3 new Haggadot, and I've amassed quite the stack. Not always medieval ones, I think, but we're always comparing and looking, and people get to we have a lending library basically. All the guests they can get up and pull out a Haggadah or 2 and flip through them if they get bored, and then put them back and pass them around. And that's the way in which we do the Haggadah sharing. And my wife tries to get me a new Haggadah every year. She had a good run, and then she went 0 for 2 the past couple of years on buying ones that I already had. But that's what happens when you have a lot of Haggadot. What are your favorites? What are the favorite moments that you guys have always you're looking forward to that piece right there?
It's got to be the Afikomen, right?
Really?
In everybody's house, the Afikomen's a big deal. No?
I don't know.
No?
I don't know. It's
I don't want to start judging your Seder, but I feel I guess if you're talking about with the kids, I remember in our family, the tradition has always been that the kids do the hiding. Because I know some people do it the other way around, right? Some people have it where the leader of the Seder or whatever hides it and the kids have to find it before they can continue. But with us, the kids would always hide it. But I was always very excited about that. I don't know. You're poo-pooing my idea that the Afikomen is a big deal. I have to rethink my
You're
entire...
allowed to have that. It just doesn't
Seder.
work for me. What works for you, Yedida?
Matthew just reminded me of the year that my cousins and I hid the Afikomen in my grandmother's chametz soup pot.
See, that's classic.
Yeah, it was pretty classic. We still joke about it. I'm sad that my kids aren't growing up with my cousin's kids so that they can do that at my aunt's house or my parents' house. Again, flashbacks to historical Sedarim that I'm sure I'll relive with my children, where that we also would go around the table and everybody would read a paragraph in their preferred language. And inevitably every year, the paragraph about the maturation of the adolescent woman's body, my cousin who was my age, no matter what, every year that paragraph would land on him.
As it is said, I let you grow wild like meadow plants, and you grew and matured and came forth in all your glory, your breasts full and your hair grown, and you were naked and exposed. Some add, and I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your own blood. And I said to you, in your blood, live. And I said, in your blood, live.
Every year that paragraph would land on him and it would be so awkward and uncomfortable. Anyway, so that's, those are fun moments in the Seder, I think, for everybody. Finding the Afikomen, whether or not you hit it somewhere you could, and other risque rated R moments in the Haggadah.
I like Hallel because it separates the pros from the amateurs, right? If you can really get into it after the meal and take the time and keep singing, then you really you're in it, and I'm happy for that. And I like to really get into the Hallel part and beyond. Your soup pot story reminds me of we had a Seder guest that came and brought us a bottle of whiskey as a gift for the Seder. These things happen, and these are always fun moments. Matthew, have you ever had any Seder fails?
Seder fails. I feel every time I try to do the full beer cut, to your point about getting into the singing and get everybody going after me. Okay, let's get going. I look down, I'm getting into the groove. I'm this feels just like summer camp. Not that I ever went, but then I would kind of look up and everyone would either be half asleep or just shaking their head at me that I've kind of not just done the first paragraph and ended it. So I think my inability to read the room with my own family is usually my own Seder fail. The last couple of years, we've got small kids too who are same age as Yedida's. They're 2 boys, 6 and 4. And we try to keep them engaged. And I just feel that is just a number of Seder fails in a row, trying to keep them engaged and interested. And come on, you learned Mani Shana at daycare. I heard you. How about right now? No, I'm not doing it right now. I refuse tonight won't be different from any other night. I'm not going to listen to you.
Who here has the 10 plagues, like different kits, the little toys or the finger puppets?
My hand is raised.
We have some of it. I haven't pulled out the stash yet to look at what we have and what we don't. I should have ordered something.
Are you guys always blown away by the fact that there's like always a dead baby finger puppet? You need to have something for that. And there's always like whatever in the kit, whatever toys, there's always a little dead baby for like the 10th plague. And I'm like, really? Like, I guess you kind of have to, but it's kind of creepy and weird.
Right. I am, as I relearn and discuss these stories with my daughter, I am increasingly horrified. I think like because we learn them when we're little and grow up with them, we aren't as horrified by them maybe as we should be, because they're sort of just always there in our mythology.
I thought I had one of those copies of like the 10 plagues in a can in my office, and I was just going to go look to check what it was, because the one for the 10th is like, it's like some kind of very somber artistic, I think, drawing or picture. It wasn't a finger puppet, but yeah, like it's a tough representation.
There's always X's on the eyes, and like just it always, however fun or cute you do it, you always have to like come down to that one. And
what about cattle disease? How did your game version, like it's not just the 10th one that's tough to
sure, but that one you can cutify by like just putting like colors on a cow and like making it okay, great, and or giving that green face for like a sick animal, but like you can't get around the death of the firstborn. You guys are highlighting, though, the fact that you guys have Seders with family, and I don't, because we're clergy and we're out of quote unquote town, right? We're away from family, and we don't get to travel because it's an on day, it's a work day. So we've hosted Seders for the past almost 20 years. Really, like we don't get the gather everybody together. So we sometimes have like different guests that are repeat guests several years in a row, but it's often new people. So I don't feel personally the need to like reinvent all the time and keep on coming up with new innovative stuff. You're always looking to make something new. How do we keep it refreshed? And I'm like, I don't know. These people haven't seen our Seder before. Let's just do it normal.
There's actually a huge advantage of being able to do that. It kind of make me, it's like on one hand, it's such a great opportunity to be with family, but you're right, Avi. Every year I'm kind of like, how can we make this better than last year? Well, like that's tough if you keep trying that every single year.
Well, so I actually work really hard not to have to make Seder. So far, we moved to this community. We were invited out last year, and we're invited out, thankfully, again this year. We try to be good company and bring whatever we're asked to bring. And I will add that when we did make Seder for students, when we were living in Nashville, we would often just get it catered, because I said I can either clean the house and kosher the kitchen, or I can cook, but I'm not doing both. So that was, so we would get whatever the caterer had on the menu. I'm not.
Like you mentioned, it's like working time. It's not just working time. It was so busy. I mean, that's the way it is like when you're a clergy for a lot of holidays, right? Like I always used to joke, right? Like everyone in the synagogue office loved Pesach because there'd be multiple days off. And I'm like, maybe for you guys. For years when I was working at a synagogue, we used to do a congregational second Seder, and it was very, very musical. So I kind of got my music fixed there, but then there were also 150 to 200 people, and I was working, and the other rabbi and I were performing, and it was a way different kind of atmosphere. I would choose my family in the comfort of my home, even if we sat in silence, probably on Passover over that experience. So it's kind of like the trade-off. When I was young, though, my great-grandfather was alive and was leading the Seder. Now, he was well into his 90s, and I knew him. I was a little kid, and so he would lead this Seder, and very musical, lots of singing, 40, 45 people, table all the way around the room, that kind of whole thing. But of course, this like Yiddisher who was in his 90s was leading it, and he mumbled his way through the whole thing. And I'm pretty sure he used to sit on the Afikomen every year, which was his own little personal joke. So that wasn't the most engaging Seder, and yet there was a lot of music. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. As usual with most situations, my bark is probably more than my bite. I'm probably very comfortable in the Seder milieu that is my family, and I should probably just get to the food, since I didn't have to make it, and that's what's important to them, the company and the food. So,
all right, one last question: have you guys ever been to like the living room Seder, like where you don't sit in front of the dining room table and then just do the dining room for the actual meal?
Never.
No? Game changer. Total game changer. We go to the living room. We've done this for 10 years now. We sit on the couches. We put out a spread of like karpas and we have wine and just, we don't feel hungry. We feel relaxed and we just get to like really expound on the story for as long as we want without having to worry about it. And it's and then we just move to the dining room for dinner, and then we move back for Hallel. And I encourage everybody to try that because I think it's a great way to go about your Seder.
I think that also may be more like what the rabbis originally imagined.
That is why we do it, in addition to the fact that it's actually much better. But yes, it is more in line with the original traditions. I cannot wait to be spending more time with you guys every week. I really encourage everybody who's listening to this to stick on the same feed because we are going to be coming back after the holidays with Not in Heaven, with Matthew, with Yedida. Thank you guys for coming to the Seder, and we can't wait to see you in a few weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Cette nuit est la nuit de Pessah. Papa revient de la synagogue. Toute la famille est autour de la table, le plus somptueusement dressée. Papa remplit pour chacun de nous un verre de vin, se lève et chante le kiddush.
Speaking of medieval traditions, here's Rabbi Sean Gorman of Merkaz Canada, who's speaking about historical karpas traditions, followed by comedian Jacob Samuel, who tells us his theory on the Afikomen.
Let's do it again, Sam.
My name is Rabbi Sean Gorman. I'm Executive Director for Merkaz Canada and for the Canadian Foundation for Masorti Judaism. One of the pieces that has always fascinated me, right after we say Kiddush, we wash our hands, no bracha, no blessing, and we go to karpas. We take a green vegetable, a piece of parsley perhaps, we dip it in salt water. We've all been told the salt water represents the tears of slavery. That's a new commentary. It's only about 200, 250 years old. Let's see what some of our older Haggadot say. So looking at, this is the Ashkenazi Haggadah from the 15th century, says, so to wash hands, you don't say the bracha, you don't say al netilat yadayim like you would before eating bread, before eating the matzah. Then, vitpol b'chometz, and you dip the green vegetable in vinegar, not salt water, vinegar. We use balsamic vinegar usually. Why do we dip it in vinegar? So the text tells us, Sheken minhag ha'olam le'echol yirakot b'chometz. That's the way you eat vegetables. You eat vegetables dipped in vinegar. It's salad dressing. And that's the custom from the Ashkenazi Haggadah. Let's go to the Sephardi side of the world. This Haggadah is called the Violence Haggadah. It is from the Catalonia region of Spain. It says, you wash your hands and you say the bracha on netilat yadayim. Ve'notel min hakarpas, and you take some of the green vegetable, umitabel b'charoset, and you dip it in your charoset. Not in salt water, not in vinegar. That's salad dressing. Uvrech baruch atah, you say the bracha bo'ek ve'adama, and you eat it. So it's a different custom that we have here in Spain. I vary it from year to year. Sometimes we go with the vinegar, sometimes with salt water, sometimes with the charoset. The Seder is a good time to explore these varied customs and certainly to taste the different foods of the different cultures and countries. Chag kasher v'sameach.
It is a child who asks the question.
Oh, Passover, you can perform on Passover. But the high holidays, they call it Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, there's no money in the world, even when I didn't have any money, that I would perform in those holidays. I can't. I would lose my self-respect if I would ever do it. And they couldn't even talk me into it. But they never did. I never had a problem with that.
This is Jacob Samuel, and these are my thoughts about Passover. I was thinking about Passover lately because I'm about to become a father, And I was thinking about the difference between the child and adult perspective. Because when I was a kid, I was always very excited by the prospect of finding the afikomen and the search for the afikomen. And it was something I really looked forward to. And the more challenging, the better. And now, as an adult, I'm starting to realize it's a brilliant part of Judaism that parents must have invented so that they could have some time where their kids weren't at the table. Right? They were also looking forward to that whole thing because they could have a real adult discussion without us being there. And the better they hid the afikomen, the more time they had. And I've only just figured this out in my mid-30s. I have another story about Passover. So my wife is not Jewish and didn't really grow up around Jews. And I took her for the first time to a Passover Seder. And we're driving on the way there, and she says to me, like, what should I expect? Like, what is it going to be like? And then I said to her, well, it's an hour and a half. And she said, great, that's not a lot of time at all. And then I said, until we eat. And she laughed because she thought I was joking. And she was like, so what exactly is this dinner? Like, what's it going to be like? And I said to her, well, the best way to explain it to you is that this is the most excited you'll ever be for a hard-boiled egg. It's an interesting thing about Jews. I think Passover sort of reveals a reason why Jews maybe aren't more popular, is that we make people wait a really long time to eat. Other faiths, you walk into their homes, they're giving you food immediately. We make you sit down and read and discuss rules first. And you'd think, like, after, an hour, 2 hours, surely this food must be unbelievable. Like, what culinary delights await with such a long lead up. And no, we're coming out with gefilte fish. It's a 2-hour wait, and then you get cold gefilte fish.
Phoebe, what working metaphor can you share about our time and this year's celebration of Passover, like Mark Carney, the Moses, and Trump, the Pharaoh?
I suppose it would have to. Well, it depends what percentage of your Passover items are, I guess, made in Canada, right? Another thing to think about in terms of Canadian Passover this year versus American is the cost of a hard-boiled egg.
Yes, there's egg matzah. And in Hebrew, or in the rabbinic tradition, it's actually referred to as matzah ashira, rich, meaning both like in flavor and
like enriched,
softer.
Enriched, like an
exactly.
enriched dough.
I told somebody, you know why egg matzah is called matzah ashira? Because it's made with eggs. You have to be rich to afford it this year. There was a joke in our Purim spiel this year about putting a less expensive item on the Seder plate instead of that. And I think the item example was a Lexus.
Okay, because there was something in the New York Times about that Easter eggs were going to be potatoes this year. So maybe we could borrow from another tradition.
Perhaps. Every generation, every time that is a particular moment in time, we have a way and a working metaphor to try to get Passover to come up, to merge with the times itself. I think that's the reason why we have so many Haggadot and so many versions of this story. There's a vegetarian Haggadah. There's last year a Taylor Swift Haggadah came out, which was not very good.
Daddy, what's going on here? Why is everybody singing? And how come the table is set with matzah instead of bread?
And I think that the Jews should have been in Egypt saying elbows up and pushing back at Pharaoh, make that happen. So let's hear from one of the staff reporters for the CJN, Jonathan Rothman, about the clash of politics and Passover, followed by a little roundup of what notable Canadian politicians have said about Passover, like former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Ontario NDP leader Marit Stiles, and former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney.
Testing. When I think about this year's Seder and going to the States, I definitely wondering about wiping my entire WhatsApp or any communications apps before I leave, with my family gathering in Colorado, my brother's kids coming in from Montreal, my sisters from Philly, and our cousins from the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut areas, other cousins from California. This year, at a family Seder, that's always, as I think many, many families must do, take the Magid, the story, and reflect on the shades of it in our current world and politics. I think about what political discussions might come and might not come. And I also think about the fun interlude that I hope we'll get from my son, who's promising 20 plagues because he's a self-proclaimed math genius, math whiz, that may take place. I think also about, and regardless of who's practiced among the younger generation of cousins, by the end of the first Manishtanah Halayla Hazeh, you've got everybody singing along, and it doesn't matter, and we're all children again to some degree, I guess, depending on how many glasses of wine in you might be. So, Chag Sameach to everyone, and may our tradition also continue with the annual saying of, to whomever spills the red wine on the tablecloth, that you aren't the first and you won't be the last.
This time from the Passover service, the Haggadah, but with a new twist.
Who knows what? Hi, everyone. Well, I have a special guest here with me on Parliament Hill, Rabbi Shear. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mr. Shear.
Yes, well, no relation. I spell my name with a C and two E's, and you're...
I'm a C, but one E.
One E, okay, great. My father's father was Jewish, so there's a branch of my family that were Jewish, and Passover is coming. And I wanted to know if you could tell me a little bit about it. In other words, I'd like you to explain why this night is unlike every other night.
Very, very well asked, Andrew. Great questions.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, I'm Marit Stiles, leader of Ontario's official opposition NDP.
Chag Pesach Sameach to all members of Alberta's Jewish community.
Jewish communities in St. John's East and across the country are celebrating the start of Passover.
Jews across Ontario.
Jewish communities across the country and around the world will celebrate the beginning of Passover.
As you gather and hold Seder dinners this week, let me say thank you for all that Alberta's Jewish community has always done to help build this province.
C'est un moment où les familles se réunissent autour de la table du Seder pour manger le matzah et le maror, lire des textes de la Haggadah et réciter les 4 questions.
I'm reminded that this is a time of reflection and renewal, a time when we remember the journey of the ancient Jewish people from slavery to liberation.
And moving to the Promised Land, a central moment in Jewish history.
For generations, the story of Passover has been passed down from parent to child, a testament to the resilience of the Jewish people in the face of adversity.
C'est aussi un moment où on célèbre le triomphe de la liberté, la puissance de l'espoir et la persévérance du peuple juif.
For all Canadians, we take inspiration from your strength and determination and celebrate the significant contributions Jewish Canadians make to the fabric of our country.
Before we end, I thought it would be appropriate to teach you the Passover salutations, the traditional Passover salutations.
I love that. So
right.
I can wish everyone a happy Passover
exactly.
in Hebrew.
Exactly,
okay.
in Hebrew.
On behalf of the Ontario NDP,
on behalf of my family,
I'm wishing you a joyous and meaningful Passover.
May you have, even under these unusual circumstances, a blessed Pesach.
I wish peace, health, and joy to everyone celebrating Passover.
To those celebrating, I send a warm wishes for a joyous Passover.
So the first word is chag, which means holiday.
Okay. Chag.
Kasher, which means kosher.
Okay.
Sameach, which means happy.
Sameach.
Okay, so let's do that one more time. Chag, kasher, sameach.
Chag Pesach Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Pesach Sameach.
Chag Kasher Sameach.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Absolutely.
Hi, and Chag Sameach. I'm Mike Wilner, baseball columnist for the Toronto Star, and formerly one of the radio voices of the Toronto Blue Jays. I wish that this Pesach, we weren't still in a situation where let my people go is a very real thing, and I'm sorry to start this on a down note, but it's impossible to imagine that we would find ourselves in this situation again in our lifetimes. When I was growing up, we had an open spot for the refuseniks, the Soviet Jews who weren't allowed to leave the Soviet Union before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And now for another year, we'll have an open seat for those who remain in captivity, hopefully still alive in the tunnels. Most, though, of my Passover memories are very happy, and most of them all of them center around family, generations that are now gone, but I can see very clearly the Seder table at my grandparents' house on Shalmar Boulevard in Toronto with my grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins, and the incredible food. And passing those traditions along to the next generation, and hopefully the next generation after that, as by the time the first Seder rolls around, I will have 2 children in their 20s. That's what really makes me happy. I remember 20 years ago bringing my youngest daughter to a Seder when she was barely 2 weeks old. And now she and her sister have grown up embracing such wonderful Jewish traditions. What sticks out for me so much is the end of the Seder. When I was growing up, the Seder at my grandparents, after the meal, my grandfather, who was your typical grumpy but lovable 70s and 80s grandfather, would fly through the Birkat HaMazon and the Hallel at the end. But then, in a tradition that continues to this day, more than 50 years later, we would stop and sing.
Every time they sang the part, Dai Dayenu, they clapped their hands. Can you do that too? Dayenu, Dayenu.
Like I assume most families do at the end of their Seders. And my brother, my cousins, and I were all Bialik kids, and we had gone through the mock Seders at Bialik every year and learned the songs and learned those specific tunes. And as the years evolved, it would become almost a contest between my cousins and I to see who could get through Echad Mi Yodea faster. Who could polish off Chad Gadya the soonest. And even though it's the end of a long night, it always makes the Seder end with laughter. But as I talk about it, I'm looking forward to doing it again this year, seeing if my kids can finally keep up with me.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
I grew up in a household where my parents came from very different backgrounds. My father's family were Scottish Jews, and my mother's family were Holocaust survivors from Poland. So we often had 2 nights of Passover so we could experience the 2 different cultural specifics / madness of the 2 families. So when we would go to my father's family, my grandparents' house, we would be reading Ma'anishna Halayla Hazeh Mikol Halelot with a Scottish accent. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. And it was hilarious, but we were forced to read every single word in the Haggadah to the point where, the kids get anxious, the cousins start kicking each other under the table, and the annoying uncle would start commenting on my weight. Or was that just me? I don't know if that reply. And then and when we would have the Seder with my mother's family, there would be a lot of screaming and a lot of recalling of sort of painful events. Although it was really hard to get them to talk about their experiences in the Holocaust, they certainly could talk about all the resentments that they have garnered since then. But it was also full of laughter and warmth and great food. And we were allowed to drink wine in that one. So for me, like many people, I'm sure, of my generations, when you take on the role of matriarch, you suddenly get a chance to lead it the way that you would want to lead it, which is very challenging because you then have to make decisions. For us, we've tried to focus the Seder really on the kids and what their experience is. And as a writer, I look at Passover as an opportunity to tell a story. I'm super curious as to why these biblical stories have survived for millennia. What is it about them that's so fascinating and so twigs our inner psyches, our desire to have winners and losers, sadness and torture, conflict, death? The questions in the Seder are really provocative. And the point of the Seder is to ask questions. And I really appreciate it when questions like, why would the Pharaoh say no when his people were suffering? And why did God harden the Pharaoh's heart so that his people would suffer? Those kinds of questions are really important. At our Seder, for the 4 questions of the children come up, we ask people if they have any questions. And when the plagues come up, we often say, does anyone want to talk about modern plagues? During COVID, it was COVID. A modern plague was the plague. And now, of course, I think a lot of it will hopefully be able to be focused on freedom, on struggles of freedom, and on war, on the humanity behind issues of enslavement, of oppression. Part of what we've always done is point out that the people of Egypt most likely didn't deserve the plagues that fell upon them. And that it was really important. At one point, there's a story about how when the Jews got to the other side of the Red Sea, they were celebrating and God said, don't celebrate the death of your enemies. It's not a good look. And, hopefully we can dig into the humanity of the current conflicts as well as of the current situation that, our big elephant neighbor to the south is inflicting on the world. For many of us, the Seder is really poignant right now. It's about freedom and liberation and situations of pharaohs, which are all around us right now. And I hope that we'll be able to have some discussion in the family. And I hope I can facilitate it in a way that everyone's feelings get heard. I don't know about you, but for many of us, we're in a generation where our parents are sometimes single-issue voters. And our children are in the age of TikTok and Instagram, some of whom have become radicalized in a way that the parents wouldn't agree with. So for many of us, we're squeezed between parents and children. And for me, the goal would be to try to have a Seder where everybody can talk and not agree, but at least hear each other and perhaps ask each other questions.
One of the things that I always think about is the tension at the Seder between novelty and the need for innovation and tradition. David Bashevkin, who hosts the 1840 podcast, was speaking about this. And, he was talking about there's this push always. What are you going to do for your Seder this year? How are you going to innovate? What are you going to be doing new about it? And he's like, but why don't we just recognize that there are traditions and we're okay with traditions? and we know what we're doing and we do the rituals. And for some people, that's the only ritual they get all year, and that they really get to be part of in an active way, as opposed to maybe the high holidays where they're more passive in it at the services. And so let people have the things that they always like. And I think that there's something really interesting about pondering that question about the tension between how do we innovate and how do we rely on the traditional pieces that we already have.
Where would you say the pressure comes from to do something new?
Part of it is internal for people who are like, quote unquote, bored by the Seder, right? They've been doing it every year and they're thinking about the Seder a lot. And they're like, well, what can we do new and different this year? The same way that, you know, anytime you do something every year, you want to go and add a twist to it. But I think that part of it also is the, you know, rabbinic industrial complex, where there's so many, like, so much discussion and you need to talk about the Seder. And so it's always, well, what can we talk about new this year? Because I'm forced to talk about it to people and they want to hear something different. And there is this push constantly to like come up with new ways and new thinking about it. And the Haggadah industrial complex, like, as I mentioned before, year in, year out, there's always new ones coming out and there's a need to reframe and come up with new ideas. Otherwise, why do you need to sell another new Haggadah?
Is any of it natural though? Like, do you think any of it is just that certain traditions people aren't so comfortable with for whatever reason because it's not in step with their values or whatever?
Yeah, so I think that that's in the liberalizing and liberal tradition. And right, a good example of that, there's a place in the Haggadah where we ask God to pour God's wrath upon the nations, right, that do not believe in God. And a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't sit well with me because I have non-Jewish friends and neighbors that I don't want wrath poured on them. And there is a desire for some people to create a new ritual or a new way of thinking about those words. So I think that it's both. And I think that we see in the Haggadah as it evolves over time that change does happen, but change generally happens generationally and over so many years that Bubby's Seder and Zadie's Seder is exactly the Seder that you're used to, whereas you don't realize how many changes you've made to it that are small, that your grandchildren are going to adopt as Bubby and Zadie's traditions. And there's something about that internal, slow, gradual push also is just as much part of it.
Sure. I mean, I think that what's different about this year is that I don't think things are moving forward towards progress.
Quite possibly.
I don't think that's something that could be stated with confidence this year at bare minimum. I'm just thinking of measles alone, but even without talking about anything bigger. But
measles, was it one of the 10 plagues? I mean, maybe boils?
Well, you know, it does. I was thinking about it a little.
Skin conditions of some kind,
well. Yeah. So something I was thinking about that's a little bit galaxy brained about Seders and so forth this year is I was thinking, do you want to bear with me with a little bit of a wild analogy, Avi?
Please.
Can you? Okay.
That's what I live for.
But I was thinking about specifically like the sort of the new anti-Semitism coming specifically from the Trump administration in the States. And I was thinking about how many tabs I currently have open to articles by Jewish writers all saying, what is the Trump administration doing? This is not something we asked for. This is not meaningfully fighting anti-Semitism. This is not anything. This is making it worse for American Jews. This is not a good thing. By this, I mean arresting people who are on a visa or have a green card for having the wrong views about the Middle East. And I was thinking about just how powerless Jews are in this thing that is ostensibly about us, this fight against anti-Semitism. And I was thinking about how, you know, Avi, we've talked about this, obviously, and you know more about it than I do, the phenomenon of like the Christian Seder.
Yes.
Christians doing a Seder,
Yeah.
kind of, whether you want to call it LARPing, cosplaying, culturally appropriating, celebrating, honoring, whatever you want to call it, the Christian Seder. It feels to me as if this year, it's as if the Christian Seder became the Seder, and Jews were sort of like, wait, but we have something too that's called the Seder, and that's the real one. What are you doing? What are you doing? But there's just so few Jews in the world. And what I'm thinking is that that's something like this is what's happening with the fight against anti-Semitism, where the thing that it was supposed to be, which is defending Jews' human rights, has kind of gotten subsumed into something else that's not about us and not good for us.
I have so many thoughts right now. Like, my first one was like, wait a second. do you think that there were Egyptians that were like railing against Pharaoh and like, listen, I know you're saying I will not let them go, but maybe we should. I don't want my firstborn, dying in a plague because you have this thing against the Israelites and you don't want to let them go. Let's like protest. And
you think they had a hands-off rally?
I don't know. Maybe they did. The times make you think about like what were the Egyptians doing and thinking at the same time, because I don't think that they were universally behind all of this if the plagues were coming after them one after the other. So that was my first thought when you're talking about that. I love how you call it cosplaying or LARPing at the Seder, and there's a lot of discussion around this both within the Christian community and within the Jewish community as well. I actually just had an ad fed to me on Instagram recently, and it was for clearly Messianic Judaism, and this individual was, or a Jew for Jesus, or was talking about the real Jewish Jesus, and this individual was sitting there talking about stuff, and he didn't have a kippah on, but he had really long curly payas, like, and I was like, oh, this guy was like, this is something else that I should do as a Jew. And there's this push to try to get in line with who Jesus was as a Jew, and because everybody has this image of the Last Supper as a Seder, then we should do a Seder also and be in line with that. And you don't get to have it all the ways. If you want to do these things and not see it as like cultural appropriation or LARPing at it, this is not like. And this is a bad metaphor because even this is not great, but this is not St. Patrick's Day where you say like, oh, everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day and we're all going to go and drink Guinness, right? This is a serious tradition and a serious moment, that what you're pointing to, this notion of like, well, they're innovating, right? Because essentially that's where we're going with this. And we have to hold on to tradition. Maybe it's a message to the Jewish community to point out that traditions are ours and our traditions are ours and our culture and our religion is ours, and don't co-opt it and don't make us passive in this fight, right? That whole nothing about us without us that people talk about with various minorities. It's not a good feeling, and we should be advocating more for this and just getting our voices out there and saying, don't do this, whether it's having a Seder or whether it's fighting anti-Semitism in our name in a way that we don't necessarily want.
I would much prefer the culturally appropriative Seder.
Yes, to the arresting of people in our name
to
that we
the
don't want.
Abductions.
Shalom Aleichem. It's Jaime here from Midlife Crisis, and we just wanted to wish you all a Passover greeting. Cleaning and cooking in so many dishes, out with the chametz, no pasta, no knishes, fish that's gefilte, horseradish that stings. These are a few of our Passover things. Motzi and maror in trouble with Pharaoh.
Speaking of innovation and creativity, let's hear from performance artist and YouTuber Maya Ben David on her love of Moses, Rabbi Susie Tendler from Congregation Beth Tikva in Richmond, BC, on what it means to invite all who are hungry to come and eat, and musician and broadcaster Talia Schlanger on the centrality of questions and what freedom can be.
When the plagues strike, when the lice bite, when we're feeling sad, we simply remember our Passover things, and then we don't feel so bad. A Freilichen Pesach.
Hi. My name is Maya Ben David, and I am a performance artist and YouTuber. I recently made a cosplay of Moses' staff that got turned into a snake.
Moses. I know it's hard to be a leader. I know it's hard to be an artist.
So it's like a snake Moses cosplay. It basically looks like a sexy snake girl in like Moses robes and garbs and sandals holding a staff. And I guess you can probably tell from this that Moses is my fave. And so is Passover. I like how Moses canonically is kind of a loser, or at least he's not as magnificent or outgoing as people usually portray him in popular media. He isn't confident in public speaking, and Aaron does most of the speaking for him. He's kind of angsty. He doesn't always do what God wants him to do, and I love him.
You're doing such a good job, Moses.
My name is Rabbi Susie Tunler. I'm the rabbi at Beth Tikva Congregation and Center in Richmond, British Columbia. Aspects that I love most about the Passover Seder are threefold. That it always stays the same, and yet it is always relevant. That it's a lesson plan par excellence, and that it takes place in the home with parents responsible for facilitating it. As such, I find that the memories created around the Passover table are like no other holiday or time in our lives. For me, I lovingly recall my mom's sinkers. They were even rejected by the garbage disposal, so they were a bit harder than that we laugh about to this day. Or even the year that my father started the Seder saying, Halach ma'anya, let all who are hungry come and eat, explaining that anyone who would knock on the door should be invited for a place at the Seder table. Well, sure enough, just about at that moment, there's a knock at the door. My dad goes and answers the door, and it's a vacuum cleaner salesman. My dad explains that we're in the middle of a family celebration and politely wishes the man a good evening and comes back to the Seder table. I was so perplexed. My dad had just taught that anybody who came to the door, anybody who was hungry, anybody who needed a place for Seder should be invited. Well, I returned to school that year. I believe I was in first grade, and my class was asked to write the newspaper article about what we did for spring break. My dad has never lived down the fact that I clearly was still so troubled about this incident weeks later that I shared it with our entire community. And now I'm sharing it with all of you. But my takeaway from this moment that has stayed with me all of these years really was based on my parents' typical way of operating. And that was to learn the value that there is always room for one more. To think about who needs a place and not wait for them to just show up at the doorstep. Rather invite them in advance. I learned the value of spending time with other people, discussing matters that matter, all the more so when you don't agree. Of inviting in newcomers and the people that we so often don't think to invite, certain that they already have plans. Every year, the Seder reminds us that the themes of slavery and freedom, the bitter and the sweet, continue to be relevant. And one of my core messages that my parents taught me is the importance of taking the pause to create the memories which engage us to look back, to take stock of now, and envision the future. We do this by celebrating with and binding our fate to others, knowing that we cannot do the work alone, and we cannot simply leave it for others. It takes all of us. Wishing you a very happy Passover, one that will contain memories for years to come, and that next year shall we find peace in Jerusalem. Chag Sameach.
I know you are tired and scared to close your eyes. I'll keep watch until we reach the ocean's other side.
Hey, I'm Talia Schlanger. Okay, when you are looking at the aquarium, how do you know which one the gefilte fish is? It's the one swimming around with a carrot on its head. You can feel free to use that at your Seder or not. I have such vivid memories of Pesach and of Seders with my family. My dad leads them, and we go around the table and share in reading the Haggadah. And what always strikes me is how we place value on questions. To me, this is an essential Jewish value. We're not afraid of questions. In fact, we elevate them to a place of prominence in our Seder. You have the 4 questions, you have the 4 sons who are asking questions, and then you have pages and pages devoted to the rabbis who pulled this epic all-nighter to pretty much disagree with each other, to ask questions, to look deeper into the text, to look at each other and say, well, Actually, to me, this is so quintessentially Jewish. We value intellect and thought and disagreement, and we make space to have different interpretations and then still come together over our shared values and identity and our shared love of Judaism. When we talk about freedom on Passover, there's freedom from without, freedom from oppressors. There surely is a lot to think about in that regard at this moment in the world. But there's also freedom from within. And I always like to take the opportunity on Pesach to reflect on that and on the ways that we can sometimes enslave ourselves through limited thinking and through inner struggle. And so I want to wish each of you a Chag Pesach Sameach. May all of you and all of Am Israel know true freedom from without and from within.
And if waters rise to great unknown, I will hold you high, and I will see you home.
And to finish off this year's Seder, let's turn back and take a look at how our traditions have shaped us, with Brian Borzakowski, chair of the board of the CJN, on how Passover roots him to his Judaism for the rest of the year, and legendary promoter Gary Topp on his memories of Passover in a very different Toronto.
My name is Brian Borzakowski. I'm the chair of the Canadian Jewish News. The CJN is also the newspaper that gave me my start in journalism, so I owe a lot to this publication. Thank you to everyone who is listening for your support. Passover is my favorite Jewish holiday by far. I can't get enough of the gefilte fish for one, and my kids and I always look forward to seeing how my wife tells the story of Passover through the elaborate decorations, complete with figurines she puts on the Seder table. As I've gotten older, though, I've come to really love reading the story of Passover. When I was a kid, I just wanted to get to dinner, though I did like the cheers I'd get for showing off my excellent reading skills. It's not always easy to feel connected to Judaism on a day-to-day basis. While I live my life with Jewish values, and certainly being part of the CJN helps, there are a lot of other things going on with me that have nothing to do with my Jewishness. The holidays, of course, have a way of putting your upbringing front and center. The story itself connects me to my ancestors and the struggles that Jews have faced and continue to face around the world. And that's an important part of Passover for me. It puts what I do every day into perspective and reminds me of why I need to keep moving forward. Sitting around the Seder table and reading the story is also where I get the clearest memories of childhood. Every year, and I remember it crystal clear, being a kid sitting with my Uncle Ben, who would crack us up with the noises he'd make during Dayenu. Dayenu, bing bong, Dayenu, bing bing, and trying to rip the afikoman out of my brother's hands, and everyone taking a long break to watch the Winnipeg Jets' playoff games, back when the team was led by Dale Howardchuk and later Timu Solani. Today, I read the story to instill in my children a love of Judaism and to make sure they know what our people have gone through. I try and make them laugh with silly songs. We cheer loudly when the younger kids at the table read the story in English and cheer even louder when they do it in Hebrew. We still take breaks to watch the Jets, and now my kids and nieces and nephews fight over who brings the afikoman to the table that I now hide. As families age and go in different directions, it's always the Seder that brings everyone back together. And that's why I really love this holiday. It's the 2 days where nothing else but family and our history matters.
My memories of Passover, my parents would tie up the kitchen cupboards and bring up the Passover dishes. That was a very intense and serious procedure that lasted for a few days. They would always order this fantastic box of Barton's chocolates from New York City. The matzah and the almonds were to die for. I still have the hammer my dad used to make the Seder chicken fricassee. The Seders were ultra-long and strict events with my extended maternal family at my grandparents' place on Palmerston, just north of College. My parents wouldn't drive on the first 2 days, so we would often stay down there on Palmerston. My parents often took me up the street to the Midtown Theater, now the Hot Docs. That's where I saw Heidi. The Menorah restaurant at Eglinton Avenue was located where the entrance to the northbound Allen Road now stands. The Menorah was a great kosher restaurant that would annually dechametz itself in order to be open during the festival. Passover today is so relevant in today's upheaval, political and racial climate. However, I don't believe God is invested in justice and humanity as he or she was when the story was written.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for Pesach 5785. The show is produced by Michael Freeman and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Next year, not in heaven. It's instead of next year in Jerusalem, right? That's the, yeah. So I was trying to figure out, I was playing with it.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.